Hello everyone, this is Matthew Johns with the Cleveland Stater. I am here today with Mr. Andrew Thomas, who is an executive in residence with the Energy Policy Center and the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. Andrew joined CSU in 2008 after working as general counsel for a fuel cell company for 6 years. He has experience in the energy industry in New Orleans as a geophysicist with Shell Oil Company and as a lawyer. How are you today?
Good.
And what do you do at CSU?
So I lead research on energy policy and regulatory issues related to primarily to electricity markets and implementation of new technologies in the energy industry, or sorry, I should say the electricity industry. And I also do research on oil and gas investment in Ohio, and then research on transportation technologies.
Okay. And how did you end up in residence at CSU?
I joined here when Cleveland State got a grant back in 2008 to start up energy policy research under then President Michael Schwartz. And I decided this was a great opportunity for me to really impact the regulatory impediments to the clean energy technologies being brought on board.
Okay. So Governor John Kasich recently appointed Mr. Thomas to the Oil and Gas Commission. His term began October 16th and goes until October 14th of 2023. What was your reaction to this appointment?
I guess my reaction is that I was pleased that he asked me to do this. It is a lot of work for very little remuneration, but it's really important work because it sets the tone for so many of the issues that face the oil and gas industry, and especially for landowners.
So what is the Oil and Gas Commission? What do they do?
It's like a quasi-judiciary group agent that evaluates the decisions that are made by the Oil and Gas Division, which is within the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And so if you are an aggrieved landowner, say with a unitization hearing that took place, or with regard to the plug and abandonment of wells and that sort of thing, you can appeal a decision that's made by the Oil and Gas Division to the Commission. Okay. And then the Commission makes a decision on whether or not it is who's right in that instance. So we look at it de novo. It's new, meaning we don't have any particular reason to follow the commission, or the division, or the landowner, or the oil and gas company involved in it. We just do a new review of the facts and the law, and we apply it. If the parties choose to, they can take it to the court of law, just like you would do through any procedural act that's done by any state agency.
Okay. And would you consider this a big step in your career, or like a major event in your career?
No, I kind of look at this as more of a final act in my career. This is sort of like accumulation of knowledge that I have in the oil and gas business, working in it for 30 years. So I have a lot of history in the business, working as an attorney and as a geophysicist, that most people in Ohio don't have. And having that knowledge is helpful to the state, because the oil and gas business is fairly new in Ohio, at least on the scale it is now. It's new in Ohio.
So you say that this was kind of the final accumulation of your career. Was this always the end goal?
No. This is not. This is a small part of my work. What I do at Cleveland State is my principal focus right now, and will continue for the foreseeable future.
Okay. So how is your previous work and your experience throughout your career, how will that benefit you on the Oil and Gas Commission?
Well, I represented the state of Louisiana for probably 10 years in Louisiana as their counsel for their mineral law. And so I have a lot of experience working in unitization and in representing the interests of the state before the Department of Conservation, and also before the Department of Natural Resources there. So this is, I understand the oil and gas business pretty thoroughly, and I know how to apply that to the facts that come up in the Ohio Oil and Gas Division.
Okay, so I know that you were just appointed on October 16th. Have you done any work with the Oil and Gas Commission yet?
Yes, I've been the commissioner for the past 2 years.
Okay.
So this is a reappointment.
Okay. So what could you describe perhaps some of the work you did in those previous 2 years? Like what would be a common thing that you would do as part of the commission?
Sure. The most common cases that we get have to do with issues relating to unitization. And unitization is a method by which the state can force landowners who are refused to lease or are unable to lease their acreage to a producing company to be part of a producing unit. So it provides a mechanism so that the oil and gas producers and the neighbors to that landowner can go forward and still produce that land, and then there's a way to pay the landowners who are not able to reach a lease agreement with the producing company. Besides that, we worked on cases relating to the regulatory reach of the Oil and Gas Commission. For instance, how much, what exactly are regulated by the commission, and what isn't regulated by the commission, and we've worked on plug and abandonment requirements. There's been disputes over, how much money has to be posted as a bond for a plug and abandonment wells, and then what time they have to be plugged and abandoned. And those are the most common things that come up. There's also some disputes that come up about the value of the property that's being drained in a forced unitization setting.
How often would you say a dispute comes up? Is it something that happens fairly regularly, or is it something that kind of has some more distance in between disputes?
No, they come up regularly, and more so. As we have gone, we produce more oil and gas in Ohio in the last 3 years than we did in the last 50 years. And so we are, as the stakes have gotten higher and there's more and more drilling, not surprisingly, there's more and more disputes. Mm-hmm. And so we meet every other month, and we always have a big docket of 2 or 3 cases, and there's a backlog, and so we have lots of disputes that come up.
Okay, so something else you're currently working on would be the MicroGrid project. What can you tell me about the MicroGrid project?
So the MicroGrid project is funded by the Cleveland Foundation, and this is a project that is looking at ways to develop a small grid is able to island off of the main grid in downtown Cleveland. And the idea is that we would have within this microgrid area, we're going to have clean power generation and reliable power generation, so that if you're on this island and you are and the grid goes out, you will not lose power on that. And so it's an area that roughly is bounded by East 55th on the east, and Cuyahoga River on the west, and Carnegie Avenue on the south, and Lake Erie on the north. So it's around 5 square miles that we're looking at, and if you're within this area, and if you are hooked up currently to Cleveland Public Power or can be hooked up to Cleveland Public Power, you would be eligible to do this. And that's assuming that we're able to proceed with the plan that we've developed.
So for the typical resident that is hooked up to Cleveland Public Power, what does this mean for them? What do they have to do on their end, or what effects might they see?
Well, residents will not likely have access to this. This will be commercial.
Okay.
It's most likely residents don't really care that much, because we're talking about the difference between 99.9% uptime versus 99.999% uptime. So, we're talking maybe 5 hours a year and 5 minutes a year difference. Mm-hmm. And most residents don't really care. I know we've had some outages recently, and a lot of residents were pretty upset about that because it was significant and it was during a really hot part of the summer. Mm-hmm. But those are not that common. And this is really more about the ability to have uptime when during short periods of times that electricity is out. And this is more of a commercial problem. As we become more and more invested in data, and this is where job growth is most occurring in Northeast Ohio, well, anywhere in the world, really. It has to do more and more with the Internet of Things and big data, and all of those things are pointing more and more towards where the future growth is in the economy is in these areas where you have to have uptime, meaning it needs to be up all the time, and you can't have outages, even brief outages on the grid. And so this microgrid solves that problem. It provides a control system, advanced smart metering, smart technologies for how we do the microgrid, and it merges all that with the on-site generation. In this case, we would be looking at a combined heat and power plant that's run off of natural gas in downtown Cleveland at the Cleveland Thermal Plant. Cleveland Thermal provides steam for the region, including here at Cleveland State. And so they would be putting in what is essentially a thermal plant for themselves that has byproduct electricity coming out of it that would run this microgrid. So the upshot of it is that we've been able to come up with a plan that shows that we can build this microgrid, we can provide virtually 100% uptime for end users, and we can do it for a price that is competitive with commercial prices in the region now. And that, in turn, we believe is going to drive growth in downtown Cleveland. So
to kind of play off of that, economically speaking, this is going to create jobs?
Yes. We project, let me see if I can find it. Economic impact, we're projecting around 1,000 jobs. It's about 2,000 jobs and about $90 million a year in earnings by 2026 that would come from this. And these are jobs that would be over and above what would happen anyways. In other words, we didn't build the microgrid, there's a certain amount of growth that's going on anyways. And our projections are that it's going to accelerate growth within certain areas of the economy that needs microgrid type support. Those areas are things that are data center heavy, and things like finance, accounting, legal, high tech, and insurance and health industries. Those are the areas where there's a great deal of growth in nationally, not so much in Cleveland, but nationally there is, and that we think is going to change if we build this microgrid. We're going to start to see that type of growth in downtown Cleveland.
Okay, and one last thing is, what is the time frame on this project to when we can really start seeing it take effect on economics as well as just on the power side of things?
So Cleveland Thermal has a plan in place and permits in place to move forward with their combined heat and power plant, and that's going to be the cornerstone to all of this. That they could do this year, and I think probably will, regardless of whether we have this microgrid or not. But the microgrid itself would take a couple of years to build. We would have to be doing underground wires, and not only underground electric wires, but also underground fiber optics, because this is heavily a matter of control systems that are going to be operating this, plus batteries and what they call UPS systems, which are uninterrupted power supply systems, that really control the smart control system that will enable the system to respond instantly to disturbances in the grid. And so this not only fixes the problem of outages, but also fixes the problem of brownouts and voltage sags, and a lot of times you see your lights blink or your computer blink, and that's all due to those problems that companies that rely on data cannot have. You can imagine if you're a hospital and you're in the middle of an operation and you're looking at your screen, you can't have that just suddenly blink on you in the middle of it. Right. And so those are really important things. And I should mention one other thing too, is that because this has its own separate fiber optic system that supplies it, it's also independent of being hacked. So the problem of Russians sitting around, hacking into our electrical grid, which has been raised as something that not only could happen, but has happened. At this point, the Russians simply have chosen not to shut down our grid because, for whatever reasons. That will no longer be a problem with the microgrid because they can't do that. It's all independently controlled within the microgrid. And so if there is a break-in of the national grid by the Russians or the North Koreans or whoever else that might be trying to do this, that would not be able to affect the microgrid. So in the future, I think we're going to see everybody going to microgrids. The entire nation is going to be a web of microgrids that are all independently operated and distributed around the country. And not only will this resolve the problem of security, it resolves the problem of resiliency, it also is cheaper and will be based on clean energy. So it's a lot of wind, solar, and highly efficient natural gas systems that control this.
Okay, and is this something that's the first of its kind, or has this popped up anywhere else?
There are about 70 microgrids operating in the nation right now, and they're all in front of the meter, meaning they're on like a campus. Like, Princeton University is a great example of this. And during Hurricane Sandy, Princeton University never went down because they were operated exactly the way we're talking about, a CHP and solar panels that were operating. So what's going to be first of its kind is this is a commercial microgrid, meaning that it's going to be operating not just on a campus, like a military base or a hospital or a university, but actually going to be operating on a system where it's actually distributing energy to 50 or so customers. And so there's a lot of interest in this nationally. Because what we're proposing is very different from anything anybody's done in that regard. There's some that are similar to it. There's one in Brooklyn that's kind of similar, but none of them really are fully commercial like this one is that we're proposing to do.
Okay, and is there anything else in regard to the Oil and Gas Commission or the microgrid project that you would want to add today?
The microgrid project was not just Cleveland State. We had support from Case Western on this, and it's funded by the Cleveland Foundation, if I didn't say that. And of course, the county and the city have been involved as well.
All right, well, that'll be a wrap then for today. I thank you very much for your time, Mr. Andrew Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a
All
pleasure.
Right.